what I like about this place. Everything works. Hasn't always been the case. That's true. I'm told. So. Hi, I'm James Poulson, and I just want to say welcome to everybody. Thanks for coming out on a nice rainy night, and the light's cooperating, so you can actually see the slides. It was a little bit bright yesterday. We did a dry run, and my sister Rebecca is going to be on slide duty, and yeah, welcome. So the presentation that I did on the architects of SJ a couple of years ago kind of focused on two men who designed the main 6 buildings on the quad. And I was curious about the oldest building on the campus, which is the SJ Museum. So I looked into that. So go ahead, hit the slide. So this is Ludlow. Ludlow and Peabody, and go ahead. This is Mr. Peabody. So I'll be talking about these guys a little bit later, and my feelings won't be hurt if you came 2 years ago and you want to hear this information repeated. So I'm going to first talk about. That's going to be my signal. We didn't work out all the details. So the SJ Museum, and it was this is going to be like an auction or something. I'm going to go like that when I need a slide. Okay. Anyway, the question mark was placed there because I was curious about the architect, and I looked up the nomination form to find out who designed the building. And found that in the nomination form, it said it was designed by Boston architect John J. Smith, who I was unable to find. And I found a John J. Smith house in Boston, and this is it. And it was the home of a 19th century black abolitionist in Dorchester, not our man. He organized black military units during the Civil War, and later became a state congressman. Anyway, that was kind of a dead end. So I was in contact with my friend Chris Allen, who actually wrote helped write the nomination form. So I asked him if he knew anything about the architect, and he didn't. And so then I looked at Ed Crittenden's book, and I kind of hit the jackpot. So he listed a Boston architect, Charles Getty, without an S, and so that led me on the path to find Charles Geddes, who was a San Francisco architect and is likely our guy. There's an architecture website that just lists works of architects in California, and it lists the SJ Museum as being one of this. So that was found, and I felt very good about myself. And this is one of his. This is a chapel that he designed it's in Yosemite National Park, and it's very beautiful. And he designed a lot of churches, so there's a connection to Sheldon Jackson, I think, through church designs. So Geddes was a practical architect, and he created designs for Gothic revival churches, and he said they could be built for $4,000 or less. If lumber prices were lower than they were in California. And a couple of his churches endure, including this one, and I went on a little Google Drive because I had addresses but not photographs. So this is in Berkeley, and this is from one of his little patterns that he came up with, one of his designs. And then 2 blocks away, I drove my little Google car, my little Google man, and he designed this one for the Presbyterians, kind of the same model. There's a kind of tree in the way, so I couldn't really get a good shot of that. But it's very, very pretty designs. Gothic revival is kind of a hot thing, and in that time late 19th century. And so I was kind of curious, how did he go from designing these to designing a concrete octagon? And the answer is he likely was inspired by a very charismatic phrenologist. And phrenology, for those of you who aren't familiar with this, is somebody who will come up to you and feel your head and tell you, different aspects of yourself that you didn't know. If you have a little bump under your eyeball, you're good with languages. And he went on kind of the lecture series circuit, and he wrote the definitive book on concrete octagons. It's probably one of America's strangest homegrown architectural movements. It's the concrete octagon. And there's a book on American architecture, a field guide to American houses by Virginia Savage, and it has a 3-page chapter on the movement, and it's called Octagon, which ends the section on romantic houses and precedes the section on Victorian houses. So it's just right in the middle. It's unlike any other architectural movement. It is credited to a single man who was, which is very unusual. There's another architectural movement called Richardsonian Romanesque, which is credited to one guy and his designs. But this is unusual because it's credited to one man, and what's even more unusual is he wasn't an architect. And this is the man, and his name is Orson Squire Fowler, and Mr. Fowler wrote the book on octagons. And here is the book. And you can see he lived by his own words. He followed his own advice, and he built the building that you see on the left there. And let's see, go ahead. Yeah, so this is the shape of an octagon, and he says in his book, it's about 200 pages of, it's pretty dense stuff, that's part of the fun, right? That an octagon, you will get 5% more space than a square rectangle for exterior running foot of wall. Make sense? Okay, because it's closer to a circle, I suppose. And so he actually built one for himself. He got rid of all those useless corners, and he built a 3-story, actually 4 stories, count the cupola, concrete building in Fishkill, New York. And the 3rd edition of the book, because it was very popular, he advocated using a new material, concrete, even though the Romans would probably take issue with that assertion. And his recipe for concrete was not like today's. It had 3 ingredients: lime putty, sand, and gravel. And so it was probably pretty soft. He was a man of his time, so Fowler writes with a lot of exclamation points as he describes his discovery that concrete didn't disintegrate over time. And he built his 4-story, 60-room concrete octagonal house in Fishkill for his family. And it was complete with indoor plumbing, which was kind of a novelty at the time. And the fate of the building is kind of worth noting. There's a website devoted to Fowler because he's such a charismatic guy. And what is the fate of his 90-foot tall, and some sources say it was 60 feet tall, 4-story, 60-room house set on 130 acres on the banks of the Hudson River in Fishkill, New York? It began its construction in 1848, the same year that his book on octagon houses was published. 5 years later, the family was able to move into the manse. Unhappily, they had but a brief 5 years to enjoy this delightfully advanced mansion. The financial panic of 1857 forced Fowler to to rent the building for $2,500 a year to a real estate broker, a large sum for that era. The broker thereby converted the building into a boarding house. 2 years later, Fowler sold the building for $150,000. In a little more than a decade, the building went through 30 owners until it was sold in 1870 for $700. What had happened, there was seepage from a cesspool through the concrete walls, and I'm guessing the concrete wasn't very strong, definitely not reinforced, and typhoid fever broke out. So, it became kind of derelict, and in 1897, which was about the same year that our concrete building was being finished and stuff was being moved in, the city of Fishkill had it dynamited. So that one went down, this one comes up. It's just like whack-a-mole. Can't get rid of these concrete, you can't get rid of a good idea. So Fowler himself was figuratively dynamited after he wrote a very popular book, and a very long book, on sexuality, and went on the lecture circuit. And the Chicago Tribune declared that under the cloak of science, he disseminates the seeds of vice. And he was disgraced, and he, according to this source anyway, died kind of in obscurity in 1887. Let me see, I think I should. This is his recipe for concrete, and it's worth reading. He's lots of exclamation points about how it's amazing, the stuff, it just holds together. And I met the guy who invented it. And so there's a lot of different patents coming out on concrete. And what he was using was probably lime putty, which is the same stuff that you'd use for making plaster, and probably not hydraulic lime, which is a little bit stronger, and an ingredient in Portland cement, which is an ingredient in concrete. Anyway, I'm not going to go down that road before. Last note on the octagon buildings. They did appear before Fowler's time. There were octagons in Thomas Jefferson's day. He had one placed on top of Monticello. You can see there's an octagon on top. And there's Fowler's house that was dynamited. Oh, pretty sad. And this is the book. That's a great title. I couldn't remember the title. Yeah, Creative and Sexual Science, Manhood and Womanhood, the Mutual Interrelations, Love, Its Laws, Powers, etc., Selection on Mutual Adaptation, Courtship, Marriage, Life, and Perfect Children, Generation, Endowment, Paternity, Caring, and etc. I'd have more books that just end with etc. And then he weaves in phrenology and physiology as well, by Professor Orson Squire Fowler.
We have a copy there.
And I have a copy. Yeah, that was very strange because I was describing this book to Rebecca, and she said, "I think we have that book." Sure enough, there it is. Okay. And here's Thomas Jefferson's little studio, which is an octagon, poplar forest. Also an octagon. So. But there is an earlier octagon on the North American continent, and probably before Jefferson's time, slightly before Jefferson built this, and it was found in, drumroll, Sitka, Alaska, and the first Russian Orthodox church was an octagon. And one of the benefits of building an octagon is that they're very strong, and you get a lot of room, and you can kind of see what's going on around you. And I might mention the Russian blockhouse is also octagonal, and so you can make sure you're not going to be attacked. So lots of light and lots of strength. So. And so this is soon after Sitka was established in 1804, and I think this is from an 1827 lithograph, though. Becca's giving me the nod, okay.
Where
Go
was
down.
it? Where is that located?
That's it, that is Sitka, so that's 3 cathedrals before the one you see today.
Oh,
I
that
think
same
it was
side.
somewhere around Maxudov Street area.
Yep, anyway, there she is. Okay, so that's going to be it for octagons. And now I'm just going to talk a little bit about Ludlow and Peabody and the construction of SJ. So this is the school being built, and there's approximately 39,000 square feet of building space constructed in the time before the city of Sitka had electric power. The campus was one of the first to enjoy that modern convenience. In 1909, the students were constructing a dynamo to power the campus. The architects who designed the buildings made them as simple to construct as possible so that a team of competent carpenters would have no trouble building the structure. Lumber was milled to specs and shipped to Sitka. Several of the trim pieces are marked on the back, Sitka Training School, which was the name of the institution at the time. So the Sitka Training School, and then Sheldon Jackson dies in 1909, and then when this campus is completed, it gets dedicated to him. So, and it changes the name to Sheldon Jackson. So here's a...
Or you want to explain that view?
Sure. So you're looking at a building that was actually, the back of Allen is over on the far left, and North Pacific Hall is kind of on the right, and there's a building that was taken down, kind of smack dab in the middle, and it was removed, and then the Fraser Hall, which is behind me now, was built for the small boys, right? Small boys.
So basically this is looking towards the ocean.
So looking towards the ocean, right?
Yeah.
So from the parking lot at the Haines Center. Yeah. So, and this is a Sanborn map, and these are really cool. So there's this is 1916, and this is a fire insurance map. So it shows you which buildings are in existence at that specific time, and it tells you at a glance what they're made out of. And you can see if they're yellow, those are wooden buildings. If they're concrete, they're blue. And you can see there's just a blue part of the back of this building. That's the Logi Powerhouse building there on the upper right. And so that concrete blue is the oil tank for and also the boiler room. So. Let me see. Go ahead. And this is so this is this building. I like that. Soon after it was built. So this is 1911, and you can see there's kind of an open area that kind of like a cupola above the jerkin head roof. And that was taken down. You can imagine they probably had an issue with water, I'm guessing. So that was removed at some point. But it's amazing when we were working on this building. The rot was over there in that corner, and I think if the building had been allowed to kind of breathe the way that it was designed to function, I think. There would have been less rot, I'm just guessing, but when they closed that up, I think they created some problems, and I think a lot of the steam had nowhere to go. So that's just a guess. Yeah, so go ahead. So this is the back of one of the shingles that was on the buildings, and you can see it's marked with a manufacturer, the Holiday Mill Company in Milltown, Washington, and so they didn't pay their licensing fees in 1910 and were stricken from the official record of businesses operating in Washington, which I found doing a little research. So most of the framing lumber is Douglas fir, and so there's a lot of really good quality wood. Then you can see the shingle, all those little striations are showing that it's all straight grain. Red cedar, and these are called perfections. These particular shingles are called perfections. They're 16 inches long, and they're straight grained, and you can shingle really fast, and they last forever. So And I mean, so this is the shape that it was in when we pulled it off the building. So looks like it was just milled yesterday. But getting back to our architects, Ludlow and Peabody, they became partners in 1909, and so Sitka Commission was one of the earliest ones. They were practitioners of several architectural styles. Academic eclecticism was one, and they would go on to design hundreds of projects before the firm dissolved in 1930 when Peabody retired, and he died about 5 years after retiring. Ludlow, working with Peabody and others, is credited with designing more than 400 buildings. Here's a couple of them. There's a hospital. A lot of these don't stand anymore, so you can see them in postcards. So this is in Brooklyn, and go ahead. And I think there's a rail station. I think it's in New Jersey, and so Ludlow was a senior member of the partnership, and he was a mechanical engineer. He graduated from Stevens Institute of Technology, which was founded in 1870. It was the first college in the U.S. dedicated to teaching only mechanical engineering. He had worked as a draftsman for the Carrera and Hastings firm, and that particular architectural firm was probably the most prestigious of the time. It designed the New York Public Library and on other things. And the principals of the firm, John Carrera and Thomas Hastings, were trained in Paris's École des Beaux-Arts, and that's the next slide. So there's somebody's poster that I cribbed from the internet. That's the front gate of the École in the 1890s. So that's what our boy Peabody would have seen going to school. Peabody was 10 years younger than Ludlow. He was a Harvard graduate, and he studied architecture at Columbia. And this is kind of interesting. Architecture is kind of a new academic pursuit in America. So the first college to offer a degree in architecture was MIT in 1868. And Columbia School, the second oldest, was founded in 1881. And Harvard didn't have a design school until 1936. So architecture is a serious endeavor. Wasn't it's kind of a new thing, and so is architectural history. What I've studied is also, of course, fairly new endeavor. So academic pursuit. So I go ahead. Oh, here's some drawings of that just kind of snuck in. I think that's Alan Hall. Oh, and I don't know who that guy is. That's P. I'll just leave that slide up. I'll catch up with that one. But poor old Peabody, he was mentioned in the New York Times in 1910, falling from a ladder at the Lake George Hotel while setting up decorations. And he went to the hospital several times in the 1930s, all of them published in the New York Times, and he was suffering from pleurisy, and he died in 1935. Poor fella. And Ludlow's architectural, or his engineering background, I'm guessing it was Peabody who did a lot of the design stuff, and then Ludlow probably did a lot of the engineering. And so there's a lot of really clever stuff going on in this campus. So there's 2 chalkboards, walls in Allen that go up into the ceiling. They're counterbalanced by concrete-filled barrels. And I was going to show you that blueprint shows that. And then there's also a lot of really fancy truss work and a lot of it allows for open spaces like what we see in here. So there's, in this building, there are trusses that are all spaced about 10 feet apart all the way down this row, and they are about 10 by 10s, and you can see those little, those metal bolts, and there's a metal plate, and those actually go up through and to the roof, and they are actually helping to support the weight of the ceiling. So it's like holding the ceiling up from from this triangle here. So it's pretty clever. So that you don't need any columns in here. You'll notice there's no columns, and that's because it's kind of this. It's all engineered to be self-supporting. It's very cool. Anyway. I'm not sure if it would pass inspection these days, or get an engineer's stamp, but it's lasted 100 years. So, and yeah, and you'll see a lot of these. They're 10 by 10s. They're huge beams, and they're landing on top of windows. So, but they're not really supporting the weight down. They're kind of keeping the building from falling apart that way. They're preventing thrust. So. Clever guy. And another clever guy. This is Pete, and this is during one of the restorations, and he's holding up one of the decorative brackets that were designed by probably Peabody to be removed and replaced when they became rotten, just like this one. So that one had a nest in it, and they were not structural. They're just decorative, and so. Yeah, so there's, kind of skipping around a little bit. So there's Western stick craftsman style elements that are, you can see in the recessed windows and the wood shingle siding, and then there's accents like the wooden vents and the porch detailing, and the accentuated vertical timbers that they emphasize the hidden structural elements of the building. And this was considered honesty in building, and it was kind of an important concept at the time. You show how your building is being built, and you're not being fancy. So a little bit of the history of the profession. At this time, most of the sought-after architects in America were trained in Europe, and architecture hadn't been especially respected profession in the mid-19th century in America. Richard Morris Hunt was from Vermont. He was the first American to graduate from the École des Beaux-Arts in the mid-1850s, and he advocated for the profession and created the American Institute of Architects. And you can see every self-respecting architect will be a member of that organization now. And he did something that was almost unheard of at the time. He demanded to be paid for his drawing, and he went to court to get paid. So, popular figure among architects. And to get back to our architect, Peabody was one of the many men graduating from the École, and he came in second of his class of 300 students in 1908. And so the campus kind of shows up all of his learning, and he kind of wanted to show off a bit because this is one of his very early commissions. So, so here is, I was going to show you. Go ahead, hit the slide. So these are some details. So this is Allen Hall. This is one of the balconies that was put back on during the renovation and restoration. And go ahead. And this is not Allen Hall. This is Penn Station. So this is I just wanted to show a Beaux-Arts example. So this is kind of what people were designing at the time, and it also kind of borrows different styles, classical styles from Roman, and these are Corinthian columns here on the side, and all those vaulted ceilings. And so it's just kind of like, full of Katie bar doors, anything goes, and just kind of very opulent architecture, but it's very popular at the time. So this was designed by McKim, Eden White, and it was completed in 1910. And when this building was, it lasted all of 50 years, destroyed in 1960s, and was kind of a rallying cry for historic preservation. So let's see, go ahead. So this is one of the buildings that Peabody and Ludlow designed in the Adirondack Mountains, near Saratoga Springs. And this is also done in the Beaux-Arts style, a little more modest, but you can see also the Corinthian columns and lots of brackets and kind of a mixture of periods, but definitely Beaux-Arts. So yeah, and I think this is the building that Charles Peabody was putting up decorations when he fell off his ladder. And this was also designed with a famous architect who helped Ludlow and Peabody, Henry Hardenberg, who designed, go ahead, this building. This is the Dakota Hotel in New York on Central Park. And I did a little Google Drive, go ahead. That's what it looks like today. It's kind of surrounded, still around. It was the home of John Lennon, kind of famously, and so it still exists. And then I wanted to take you kind of on a quick tour of Manhattan. This is one of the buildings that our boys designed in New York, and this is the Mercantile Building, and it was at the time that it was built, it was like the 4th tallest building in America, and it's also known as the Chase Tower, named for the Chase brass and copper, not the bank. And right now it's the 95th tallest building in the city at 620 feet. And another fun fact about that is it was the last building to be taken off of Thomas Edison's original DC power grid and switched to alternating current, like the rest of us, on November 14th, 2007. They held on as long as they could. And now it's kind of funny because everybody, like my computer and everything else, gets AC power and converts it to DC to run. So if you just hung on just for a few more years, could have avoided that. Yeah, so let me see, I can't remember what I did. Okay, so this is another view. So this was designed for the Vanderbilt. This is looking down at the building, I think from Midtown Manhattan, where you got the Empire State Building, I think, is where this was taken. So looking down, you can see his building. And all right, go ahead. And I wanted to show you this. So our boy Ludlow was writing for the New York Times, and he reacted to this movement of modern architecture that was kind of sweeping the country in the 1930s, and he wrote a piece for the New York Times about it. It's kind of asking what the psychological effect of living in such a house would be. And this is a shorter house. It's a very famous international style building, and the international style kind of took over America, and you couldn't build anything without it being very boxy, and any grand building without it being an international style. It's also known as modern style. And that lasted through the 1960s, little various twists on it. But Ludlow was a little bit wary of it. And I'm reading Tom Wolfe, wrote a book in the 1980s, to this Bauhaus to Our House. It's worth reading. It's kind of funny. He kind of talks about this. He's very biting. He doesn't like the very austere movement of this international style, and he argues that neither did Frank Lloyd Wright, and neither did our boy Ludlow. But he did in the 1920s. Go ahead. Ludlow wrote also for the New York Times, and an article that was titled "Skyscraper Era Over." In 1933, he says that the skyscraper era is over, and he just predicts that cities would shrink as places to live and recreate, and that office buildings and they turn into office buildings and freight distribution centers. But he remains an optimist. He says that architects should prepare for the great building activity, taking account of our rapidly changing conditions and probable mode of living, so that whatever is done will not be done in a costly, haphazard fashion of former days, but shall be planned for the greatest economic use and the most adequate future development. And this is an illustration that went with the article, and it's by Ferris. Ferris is his last name. Or Johns was the person who wrote the article. And in this 1926 article that was headlined, "The Glass Skyscraper is Just Around the Corner," John speaks of Ludlow's contribution to New York architecture. He was one of the first to foresee 20 years ago, and this is talking in 1926, the necessity for adopting the pyramidal setback of buildings in our crowded cities. With the acceptance of New York, of that principle as a basic factor in zoning, Mr. Ludlow turned his attention to glass as a future aid to lighting. So he kind of foresaw that glass was going to be a new material. So he wasn't against building without ornament. He was just let me just read from his article. Now that our streets are turned into canyons and our cities piled up to extraordinary altitudes, light has become more of a problem than ever, said Mr. Ludlow. Industry and business have always demanded more light to promote efficiency, but light has a broader significance than its application to work. Light is a fundamental need of human health and well-being. There is an aesthetic opportunity offered by building with glass. Here is a new world open to us. There is no doubt in my mind that when we have properly solved the designer's problem of fusing glass walls with steel construction, we shall be able to build structures of the utmost beauty. A thing that is beautiful often, if it is simply logical, we must accept the steel skeleton without mask of any kind. Hitherto we have used small units of brick or terracotta to cover up the framework and make it look solid, but these small units or opaque curtain walls are only a convention, a hangover from the days when the walls supported the weight of the building. And the article concludes, and so this world of which Mr. Ludlow speaks, this world of terraced glass buildings, commanding views high above the city, of interiors bathed with the full strength of sunlight, or with delicately hued, lucid atmosphere, is no dream world. It's just around the corner. It is to be fully realized the moment that we are willing to give up our Stone Age prejudices and our outworn ways of seeing us architecturally. We must learn to trust in the condensed strength of steel to teach our eyes to feel the resistance and power in reed-like forms. Then this world of magic and miracles will seem more real than the old. Okay, so that's it for this presentation. Thanks everybody for coming. I just wanted to just kind of mention a few things before I let you all go, and that's just a few quick terms. That the National Historic Preservation Act is kind of an important act in 1966, and it created the National Register and that established 4 treatments for working on buildings, and so when we were working on this building, we were kind of using rehabilitation. And you can see there's rehabilitation projects going on all over the place now. Steve Clayton can probably talk to you a little bit about the rehab project that's going on down at the mill building, and it's really interesting. And but you can also restore buildings to a previous time, and so that's kind of what we're doing here. We're restoring it to what it looked like. These buildings, kind of what they look like around 1910, 1911. So, and that this is part of a national landmark, And a national landmark is defined as something that has exceptional significance in American history. And so it's not just Sitka, it's not just Alaska, it's American history that this national landmark has significance for. And so we also look at defining features, and so one of the things we do is we look at a building and we say, what are the things that make this building what it is? And so this building, one of the features is all these windows, lots of light, and so we try to keep the windows, and if we want to keep the place kind of warm, what we do is we do things like we put on storm windows, and so you can see these windows here, they all have storm windows on them, they're not too obvious, and we have storm windows like this one. I open the window, and so the storm window actually opens itself, and so you can get ventilation in some of these without having to take down the storm window. They're very clever, and it's a way to keep the original windows. Modern windows, what they have, they're like they're built with flanges, and they're to go on the outside of a building, which is kind of a feature of the international style. Anyway, these windows they're recessed because that's the way they were built. They're built in units. Okay, I'm not going to go off on windows. But anyway, so that's one aspect that we're looking at when we're restoring buildings. Is what makes this building unique, and that's just one aspect. Okay, I can take questions or move around. I'm guessing.
James, how thick are the walls at the museum? Concrete walls?
The concrete wall, that's a good question. So I might have to peel that one off. I know that when it was remodeled, the downside of concrete is that it's got an R value of like nothing. It's impossible to heat, and a lot of I think when they remodeled it, they did a quickcrete exterior, and they put insulation on the inside of the building to make it thicker, so the walls are actually thicker than they were originally. But they're pretty substantial. Yeah, maybe Rosemary worked in that building.
Yeah.
Thick.
If you went in the chunk of, when they knocked the hole,
Yeah.
that leads to the roof portion.
Oh, right, yeah.
And there's a chunk of it, and it looks like it's about, that original is probably about that thick.
Okay,
but then
just at least a foot thick.
at the end.
And then when they insulated it and put drywall on the inside during the remodel in the 1980s. So it's kind of a good project. All right. All right, don't want to make anybody do it. That was under an hour. That's tolerable.
And then this is part of a project we got some Historic Preservation Fund grants to help with the work in here, and also a couple projects on Fraser Hall. And so some of it is to raise awareness of historic preservation and the project. And I was going to see if Pete could just talk a little bit about what the work was, what was done in here, and and then so in this.
I know a slide. I think I got it.
You got one more slide?
I think so. Yes. I got an exciting slide for you, Pete. It's the Lime cycle.
Or you want to come on up and use the...
Well, hello, I'll make this short. I'm Peter Weiland, and I've been fortunate enough since day one, pretty much, when the camp took over, to be able to work on all these neat buildings. And it's fortunate I get to see how cool they were built when you look inside these walls. And we started kind of just shading the buildings, and now it's constantly a work in progress, and we're learning more and more about historical restoration and we look back, we did some things we wouldn't do now, and but we're getting better and better at it, and we care a lot about it. So, so this building, for example, I think it was probably 5 or 6 years ago. Every summer, this historical restoration team, college kids from all over the country come in. I think when we worked on this building originally, there were maybe 30 college students. And it had some pretty bad structural problems. And I think like most of these buildings, it wasn't, the structural problems were things that happened to the building later. I think if these buildings had been left alone as the original architects wanted it, I don't think they would have had these problems. But for example, one of the main trusses in the corner just had a leaky downspout, probably for 25 years. And so the whole, it was localized, but it was rotten. But it happened to be rotten where the main load of that truss comes into this wall. And so you had this sinking, probably about 8 inches. And that collapsed the main valleys coming on the other side of this chimney here. They were collapsing badly and dripping and wet for years. They just, they put patches on them, but they never could fix that roof. So we came in with college kids. We were able to do some mechanical stuff unofficially. We fixed a lot. And then, for example, we had these 30 college kids, and Roger Schmidt says, well, could they roof this thing? And I said, well, guess they could. So we put 30 kids up there and tore, I think it was at that point, like 3 layers of old shingles off, and they re-roofed it the way it is now. The latest project in here was, there again, we're trying to make you feel like you would have felt if you walked in here in 1911, So when we looked at the ceiling, there was most of the work was done. There had been patches, plywood patches and stuff like that. So we thought, well, those aren't original. We'll take all that down, but we left all the original wood that we could up there. We just cleaned it up. There were holes in a lot of the places that we just patched, and we took wood that we had from other parts of campus that was the same wood, and we filled those holes. You can hardly tell, but about from where I stand over, there was nothing. It was open. It was actually all patched. So we had icy straits. That's in Hoona Sound, local wood guy. He milled up. I gave him a sample of the ceiling, and he milled it up. It's in spruce. And so we were able to fill in this part, and you can't tell that it's not the other part unless you look very closely. But that's an example of the stuff we're trying to do now. And like James said, you can't really even see these wonderful storm windows. They're from a company in, I think, Cincinnati. And you give them the exact dimension of the windows, and you give them the angles. They'll make any window you want. It could be sideways, and they'll make an exact window to put on. And those are they're just magnets. They just sit there, so you can pull them on and off. And like James said, they even make these opening ones. So anyway, that's an example of the work that we're doing. And then if you have time later, anytime, Fraser Building is the next building. Now that we've worked on all the outside and got them under control, we're starting to work inside. And so last summer, we had a group of, I believe, 9 or 10 students, and they learned how to plaster walls. There was the main room on the bottom floor of that building was all beat up. It was textured. It was different kind of, different patch drywall. And once again, Roger said, well, can I plaster? Well, you're probably in the old days, you apprenticed probably for 10 years before you learned how to plaster. I'm like, sure, we can plaster. So anyway, a lot of those walls, unfortunately, when we started peeling off the layers, they had already been, the lath and plaster had been taken out. And so that was kind of unfortunate. What we had hoped to do is just patch the existing lath and plaster. So these holes, we got lath and they hand banged all the lath back in where there were holes. And James got some hydraulic lime through Amazon Prime, of all things. 80-pound bags came up for free. And we mixed it up, and we had ox hair that was mixed in instead of horsehair. We found some ox hair. They did all that work. And so these students learned how to plaster the old way. And it took a little trial and error, but you'll have to go over and check it out and see how it came out. It does have a feel, an old feel to it. And so that's just an example. So thanks for listening. And,
Yeah, so be sure to come Friday. We'll have show them what actual tours going through the work over at Fraser Hall.
What time is that?
It's between 5 and 9. So we'll have music and art and historic preservation. And yeah, and I hope everybody is in love with windows now and understands that there's no practical reason to replace your windows. I got little fact sheets back there. Windows.
80 people in a room, heat it up, no problem.
Okay, thanks.